Today we're going to troubleshoot this rig as to why there's no power in it. It has no power at all. It's been in storage, it's plugged into the wall, so it should be getting 120 volts. That should be powering the battery tenders, which should keep the coach batteries charged and the engine battery charged. No power at all. Of course, you can't start the generator if you don't have any battery power. So we're going to troubleshoot and figure out why this unit doesn't have any power. I'm going to assume that you've already checked your circuit breakers and that you know the power supply, the circuit breaker from the house or the pole, wherever you get power from, is on and you have power there. So we're going to start off by looking where it plugs into the rig and then go downstream from there. Bear with me. Since we've got no power, I can't pull the slide out in. So as we look at the power side here in a second, we're going to be underneath the slide out. So bear with me. Okay, here we are under the slide out. Here's my power supply from the shed, and this is where it plugs into the RV. So first step, obviously, is to make sure we have power coming in. Okay, and we've got 110 volts. By the way, I'm using one of these handy little testers. They're about 12 bucks at Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace Hardware or True Value, wherever. Pretty handy. Nice thing about them is you won't accidentally short out a couple of things, but you can also use a standard multimeter, and there are times when having this multimeter is the way to go. You have to have one. But for when I use this, because every now and then with this probe you actually can short across two pins, and when you're dealing with 110 or 220, that can be a bad thing. Next step is to check our power cord. So we'll plug the power cord in. Okay, the little blue LED is lighting up, so I'm pretty sure that the power cord is getting power. And then, by the way, this is a 30 amp rig, so we're dealing with three wires. On a 50 amp, you'll be dealing with 4. So we'll check here. Okay, so we're getting 110 to the end of the power cord, so I'm pretty confident that our power cord is good. Okay, so the next step is we're going to take this receptacle off, plug it in, and check for power on the back side of this receptacle to make sure we're getting power. I have seen that issue before, and I'll describe that to you here in a little bit. So let me see if I can do this. Bear with me here. To take this receptacle off, there's 4 screws on each corner, and there may be some silicone around the edge, so even when you take those 4 screws out, it might take a little coercion to get it to come out of the rig. There should be 3 wires on the inside, on the back side rather. There should be 3 wires on the back side of this, so once these 4 screws are out, it won't just fall out. You should be able to pull it out a couple of inches, and you'll see those wires and where they attach on the back side of this receptacle. Pull the receptacle out just a little bit, and you can see some access holes on each side there. Once I get the seal moved out of the way, there's a little access hole there, 3 of them around, so that you can check the terminals for where this plugs in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the unit back in, being careful not to put my fingers into those holes because there'll be 110 in there. And then we'll use our voltmeter to check for 110 volts. Okay. Not the ground. Where's the positive lead here? Okay, so we know this receptacle's okay because I'm getting power to this wire, and just for giggles, we can check on this little bit of Romex that's exposed here. So I know I've got 110 volts going to the Romex that goes into the rig. So this receptacle is okay. But while I'm here, I'm going to show you something real quick. So we've confirmed that this receptacle is not the issue. So I could just put this back in and then we'll continue troubleshooting inside. But while we're here, I want to just show you a couple of things real quick. So maybe this was the problem. Not the case in this video, but maybe for you at home, maybe this is where you find that there's no power here and you have power here. The next step is to take this cover off and have a look at the terminals in there. So what I'm going to do is unhook this cable. And then I'm going to check again with my sensor to make sure that I don't have power before I start sticking a screwdriver in here anywhere. Okay, this is clear, no power. So I'm going to take off the clamp on the back here, and I apologize, this is a little bit tough to show you here. But basically there's two Phillips screws that clamp this back onto the Romex there. Now we can slide that cover back. We don't have a whole lot of room here to work with, but I think you can see where the Romex comes in here. And there's a clamp screw for each wire. So on a 30 amp rig, you have, just like in your house, you have 3 wires. A black, which is hot, a white, which is neutral, and then a bare wire, sometimes it's green, which is your ground. You can see where they are clamped, and there's 3 clamps. It's just a little Phillips. When we first bought this rig, I was having power issues. This wire was getting hot inside the rig, and our AC quit. And when I was troubleshooting, I took these 4 screws out, and this whole receptacle just fell off. I believe that when they assembled the rig, they were just going so fast that they didn't get those clamped down. All right, so this one happens to be Phillips. So you just take your Phillips and maybe first check them to see that they're snug and that the wire isn't pulling out. Okay, in this case, I'm going to take the whole thing off. So I just loosen each of those, maybe a turn or 2. It doesn't take much. But if you give the wires a tug on the back, they should stay in if it's properly tightened down. So there you have it, and you can see that these are color-coded on the back. So green is for ground, black is for hot, and white is for your neutral. Just like in the house, it's the same 110 wiring that's in your house. So even though this wasn't the problem, we double checked, and it could be on your rig as you're troubleshooting. But basically, I'm going to give each of those wires a tug and make sure it's secure. If it's not secure, make sure the wire's going all the way into the fitting, and then tighten those screws down. There's a little clamp screw right there for each wire. There's 3 of them. You can put a little dot of conductive grease on there, tune-up grease, bulb grease. Just it's got to be conductive, and that'll help keep it from corroding. Okay, I've got the receptacle back in. I made sure that the seal is mushing out just a little bit as I tighten the 4 screws down to make sure it's compressing just a little bit. You don't want it to completely deform, but it should mush out just a little bit. So I'm going to plug it back in, and then I'm going to clean up just a little bit, and then we'll go inside the rig and continue our troubleshooting. Now, the first step is obviously the plug on the side of the rig. And what's the next thing downstream from that is your transfer switch. So generally transfer switches are in a box that looks a little something like this. Apologize for the glare. No power in the rig, so I can't turn on any lights, so I got bright light shining through the window behind the camera here. So this is a transfer switch. There are a couple different models out there. This is one of the more common ones. Oops, sorry, got it upside down. So inside this box, there's a set of contacts for where shore power comes in, where a generator power comes in and then where power goes out of the switch to power everything in the RV. The inverter, the circuit breakers, the fuses, all of that is downstream of this. It's very common to have this underneath the bed. Usually it's also in close proximity to your circuit breaker panels. So bear with me as I move the camera around, and I'll do a quick panoramic of how this rig happens to be, which is a fairly common construction. So here you can see my bed, and I've got half of the panel pulled up, so that's my freshwater tank in there. Side of the bed, here is, no, we definitely don't have enough light. Here's my circuit breaker panel and circuit breakers and fuses on the side of the bed. So that gave me a good hint. And then you look at the back, you can see all the power lines coming in. And here's the top of my transfer switch. So panning back around, so we're gonna go with that camera setup for the moment. So here's my transfer switch. Have the cover off already. To take the cover off on this particular model, which is Progressive Dynamics, pretty common company and pretty good quality stuff. You basically push the two pins in on either one side or the other, and the panel will snap off for you. So you can see this one looks just a little bit different than the one that I showed you. So this has screw terminals, which is a little bit nicer than this one, which has pigtail terminals. Okay. Before we go any further, let me point out that if you're plugged into shore power, you may have 110 volts in here. So you don't want to go grabbing these wires until you check some of them. You can see that we have 3 lines at the bottom there. There's one there, and one there. All right, so I've already labeled these the last time I was working in this area. We have a generator line. So this is my generator line. So that should be dead. We have the output, and we have the power coming in from shore power. So before I touch anything, a troubleshooting step is to see if we're getting power to the transfer switch. So the line coming in from shore power, which I've traced before, this one here, it has power. This is the line that goes out, and there is no power there. So the problem is here in the transfer switch. Now, a couple of things that could go wrong. For example, you could have something like this, where that was a wire nut that melted. It was a poor connection, and it got hot. Probably had the AC running, and maybe even somebody turned on the microwave. We were out in the desert, and the line got too hot on that poor connection, and it just melted it. But inspecting that here, looking at these connections, I can see that one looks good, this one looks good. That's the power coming in, that's the output power, and the generators look okay. But I'm looking closely in there at the fine detail, and I could see a lot of corrosion. Now I'm in Florida where it's very humid, so anything metal that's exposed, even if it's in this box doesn't have a seal on it because then it would get too hot. So you can't really seal it. So get a little bit of moisture in there, and I bet those contacts have corroded. So that's my guess at this point, seeing that I have power coming into the transfer switch and no power coming out of the transfer switch. You could test that by using something non-conductive to push on the switch here. So now I can have power on the switch. Oh, and I just heard the microwave beep. So now I have power going to the rig because I'm manually holding the switch down. So my transfer switch is not flipping properly. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that. So the next step then is to remove all power that could possibly come into this box before I start taking wire nuts off and unbolting stuff. Things to check. Unplug the rig. Make sure your generator's not on, which isn't too hard. If you have a solar system, make sure that that inverter is turned off or you're not piping power into your transfer switch. And then you got to think about your batteries too. Generally, you won't get any feedback. The battery power will stop at the fuse box and not come into the transfer switch because that's 12 volt power. But I know my batteries are dead. I'm going to go throw that fuse anyway. So I'm going to go unplug the rig and then we'll swap out this transfer switch. So I unplugged the rig, my generator is off, and I popped the circuit breaker, or threw the circuit breaker in the battery compartment for the coach batteries. So there should be no power coming into this box. And again, the battery is just a backup. That shouldn't be an issue. If you have solar, that may be an additional line. Bottom line, I'm going to check every black wire, and then for backup, check every white wire for any current. All right, I have confirmed that there is no power in this box, so now I am clear to pull these 3 lines out. Then I'll take this box out and wire in the new box. We're ready. But the first step of this is just taking all these wire nuts off so I can pull these lines out. If you haven't done so already, it's not a bad idea to mark them. You can mark on it with a put a piece of tape and a permanent marker, or you can mark right on the wire. It's just so you can read it next time you get in here. On these pigtail style, it's mostly pigtails to undo. Every now and then you'll run across a crimp fitting maybe, in which case you have to cut it with a dikes or side cutter, wire cutter. But the grounds are going to be in this ground bus here, and they are going to be clamped by a screw. So to get your grounds loose, you have to use in this case it's a flat-headed screwdriver, and loosen that screw so you can get those wires out. To pull them out the bottom of the box, if you happen to have the terminal style instead of this pigtail style, your box will look something like this. And to remove the wires, you'll need to back out these screws and then pull the wires down. I'm going to install this, so if you have this type, you'll see when I install this how you would go reverse that to take it out if you already have this style installed. So the next step is just to pull those wires out, and then we can take this box out. So there's the box. Fourth, that's power coming from one source, and then coming up would be power from the other source. But I bet those are corroded. All right, so that one goes in the trash. There should be one big ground wire from the outside somewhere that's separate from all the other wiring. So there's my ground wire that I had to cut it because I couldn't get the screw loose in the old panel. So there's where I cut all the old grounds. And that's where I cut off the main ground. By the way, I got this one off of Amazon. It's Progressive Dynamics, which is a pretty big brand. This is the screw terminal type instead of the old one, which is the pigtail type. So if you're reinstalling a pigtail, well, they had both of them on Amazon, both of them Progressive Dynamics brand, which I'm pretty happy with their equipment. The price difference was about $3. So I went ahead and got the little more expensive one. It was $77 and free shipping with Amazon Prime, so you can't beat that. My personal opinion is this makes better connections, and there's fewer connections. With the pigtail style, you have the twist connection, and then you have another terminal connection back inside it. Either one is easy enough to put in, so I went ahead and went with the screw-in terminal type. It's labeled, so there's labels underneath each of these terminals. Those are your generator, hot and neutral. Shore power, hot and neutral, which is the power coming in, and then the power out to the panel. So pretty simple. I'll go ahead and show you here. I think it might be a little easier to demonstrate how the connections are made here while I'm holding it in my hand before I get it mounted. But you'll run your Romex in through these, and you just push it up and those little tabs will bend back. Personally, I like to put a little bit of conductive grease up in those terminals. I happen to use this type, but there's plenty of different brands that will work just fine. Basically, you loosen the terminal with a Phillips head screwdriver right there. I got a little bit of conductive grease on there. You stick that up inside there, and then tighten the terminal down on it. There we go. And you give it a little tug to make sure it's secure. And that's all there is to it. So just make sure you get your connections going in there the right way. Generator going to generator, shore to shore, and the panel to the panel. And you should be golden. So I'm going to go ahead and hit fast forward, and we'll get this guy mounted. Don't forget your master ground. Should come in, there's a hole here on the side, should come in and go to that ground bar just underneath all the terminals. Good idea to do that one first. Before you clamp your terminals, your wires into your terminals, have a look at them and make sure that they're clean and bright and shiny. If they're not, you can take a little bit of emery cloth and scuff them up a little bit. No reason to start off with a poor connection. We are all wired up. You can see I put a little relief bend in most of these wires. That's preferable. You want to make sure that that wire isn't under tension, so it will naturally stay in the clamp. Of course, you want to make sure the clamp is tight, so you're going to give a little tug to each one, double check that they're nice and snug. Double check one last time that you have the right wires going into the right terminals. Anything that says hot
should be a black wire. Anything that says neutral should be a white wire. And then every one of those plus your master ground should go into the ground bar on the bottom. And those are the bare wires, or they may be a green. You want to make sure that the insulation, the black or white or green coating, does not go inside the terminal into the clamping area, but does come behind what's white in this case. Usually it's white, sometimes it might be black or another color, this plastic. So you want the insulation to extend into there, but not into the clamping mechanism, or you're not making an electrical connection. Usually it's about 3/4 of an inch that you need to strip. Make sure that it's not under tension, that everything's just naturally there. Give your terminals one last check to make sure you wired them right, and then you're ready to go turn the power back on and see if we got it. So I'm gonna skip outside the rig here, plug it back in, and we'll see if we got this wired right. Okay, so I've got power plugged back in. Now I'm gonna take my tester and we'll check it. So power coming in from shore power and going out is good. And power going out to the panel is good. So the last check I want to run, and by the way, I heard the microwave beep and the light came on. I must not have turned the switch off. Oops. So I know I've got power in the rig, so I'm basically solved. Now I just need to button everything up and clean up. One last test that I'm going to run here is get the generator running and make sure that the transfer switch then switches over to generator power when I unplug it from the wall. Then I will be sure that everything's working correctly in here, and I'll be a happy camper. That wraps it up. Thanks for watching. I hope you don't have this issue, but if you do, I hope this is helpful. If you have questions, comments, suggestions of better ways to troubleshoot, better ways to check stuff, by all means, please put it in the comment section there so the next person can benefit from your knowledge or your experience. Thanks for watching.